Do car manufacturers really need support, or are they just going for it because they can, because governments are desperate to get and keep their factories? And it looks like General Motors is looking for something like $300 million from the Australian government to keep making cars here. I spoke to General Motors Holden chief Mike Devereux on Friday. Well, Mike Devereux, is Holden profitable?
Yeah, absolutely. It has been for a couple of years now. We reported a nice, healthy profit last year in the 2010 financial year. And I think in about a month and a half or so, when we report for 2011, we will be again very nicely profitable.
So why do you need assistance?
Well, the assistance that we seek is the assistance, frankly, that is sought by auto companies and other manufacturing entities around the world. One of the things that I found very interesting as I was preparing for this interview was just recently the United Kingdom, one of our sister countries here in the Commonwealth, doubled the size of something called the Regional Development Fund in the UK, which is a co-investment fund to attract broad-based manufacturing investment in the UK. It was a £1.4 billion fund. Nick Clegg, the Deputy Prime Minister, just doubled it to $2.4 billion, and they've attracted 170 different applications, attracting £7.5 billion of private sector investment into the UK.
So Australia should provide GM assistance in Australia, not to help you become profitable because of a contest. It's because of a contest between us and other countries for the money. We're engaged in a competition, is that correct?
Every country in the world is engaged, I think, in a competition to attract new, high-tech, highly capital-intensive investments, whether it's Brazil with tariffs, whether it's the UK with regional development funds, whether it's other countries with less obvious forms of either currency manipulation or things like if you buy a car and you want to get it insured, if it's an imported car, it costs twice as much to insure as a domestic car. So there's lots of different ways that countries play the game. The co-investment path is, I think, the most appropriate one for Australia. And yes, Australia does need to compete with other countries.
Right, so but another way to look at that is that the company that's playing the game is General Motors and the other manufacturers. You're actually playing off these countries against each other to improve your profitability by making them compete with assistance money.
Well, what happens around the world is GM is about a $150 billion company, and we're looking to spend about 10% of our total revenues on both engineering and capital. And frankly, as that capital is deployed around the world, we try to deploy it in the way that returns the best return to our shareholders. And that is the purpose of business. So every country on the planet competes for auto investment because of the multiplier effect that it has in the economy, from R&D jobs to actual capital equipment investments to transportation and logistics. It's got a huge multiplier effect. In terms of jobs, it's got about a 5 to 6 to 1, so 5 to 1 multiplier effect. So it's a large business enterprise. It has, I think, far-reaching benefits into a lot of different sectors of the economy, so it's obvious why countries do that.
Could you see why somebody would see that as fairly cynical? You know, the way that a company like yours would, around the world, just try to get the best you can out of each country and, play them off?
Well, I think a lot of people wish that the world was flat and that everybody played by the same rules. But countries aggressively compete for what Australia has. Australia is one of 13 places in the world, 13, that can design, engineer, and manufacture a car. And a lot of countries want that same kind of capability.
So how much do you want out of the Australian government?
Well, those are figures that obviously are in negotiations with Prime Minister Gillard and her cabinet at the moment, and those are private negotiations at the moment.
Well, $100 million has been suggested. Does that sound about right?
I think when you look at what we did with the Cruise program, we make now the Cruise small car in Adelaide. It's I think it was the 4th best-selling car in January in the entire country. We had about $150 million Australian dollars of co-investment support for the Cruise small car. We would be looking to put 2 different architectures into our Adelaide plant in the second half of this decade. So that will give you kind of a reference point.
Oh, so there's $300 million.
Well, there's a range that would be certainly bigger than the $100 million that you quoted earlier.
Right. Greg Combet said this week that they want guarantees from the company before they give you any money.
Yeah.
How does that compare with other countries?
The things that other countries and in the past, Australia, has required of car companies for these, frankly, large taxpayer-supported co-investment funds is guarantees on things like investment timing. So if you don't invest the money, and if you don't buy the materials, and if you don't have the job levels and yada, all those things, then you don't get the money, or you have to pay that money back. So these are contracted things. In the case of BMW and Nissan in the UK, as they have co-invested with the UK government, I'm sure there are, and I'm not privy to their agreements, very stringent milestones. For our cruise program back during the GFC, very, very stringent investment milestones that we, even today, are tracking towards.
So let's look at another side of it. How do Australia's costs, General Motors' costs in Australia, compare with those of other countries?
Well, there's no question, not just GM's costs, but the costs of doing things in Australia, given that it is a very mature market, a very sophisticated market, are higher than they would be, for example, in China or Southeast Asia. I don't think anybody listening to this
that's right. That's reasonable. But looking at comparable countries, are your costs here unreasonably high, do you think?
No, I think our costs are in line with some of our higher output in terms of dollars value of the vehicle plants that we have in the United States. They certainly are not competitive, if you will, in terms of cost per car with our Chinese, Korean, or Thai operations, but I don't think anybody listening to this interview would assume that that would be the case. So making things in Australia, yes, costs more than it does in Southeast Asia. Big surprise. But that doesn't mean that making things in Australia is not a profitable proposition for a car company or a manufacturing entity. I think exporting things from Australia has become a lot more difficult in the last 3 or 4 years, as you've seen a massive run-up in the value of the currency. So in terms of a business model for my company in this country, we have to be able to efficiently make cars and live within our own means in terms of revenue in this country.
I appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us, Mike Devereux.
Thank you for having me.